Hey everyone, Nick here from Talking Cardboard, and today I'm very excited to play and talk about a game that I find is very unique, a game that I only found out about a few weeks ago, and a game that I'm sure many of you have never even heard of. And that game is called Codeword Cromwell. Now, this is a game that was published in 2014 by the company called Fifth Column Games, which I believe is a British publishing board game company. I have no idea what other types of board games Fifth Column Games is known for. Maybe this is the only game they ever published. And this is a World War II themed board game. I would almost liken it to like a pandemic style game, or more maybe mechanically more like a tower defense game. And in this World War II themed game, you play as the defenders of a fictional British village called Berkham-Stokes. And you'll be playing as citizens of Berkham-Stokes, as well as just groups of other types of miscellaneous villagers and some actual British or maybe even U.S. soldiers defending this town from a German invasion. Now, this is all fictionalized because, first of all, there's no Berkham-Stokes village, but also my understanding is the Germans never actually invaded Great Britain during World War II. I know there was the Battle of Great Britain, which was essentially all aerial combat, but the Germans were never able to successfully get troops on the ground in Great Britain. But this game is pretending that, in fact, that did happen. The Germans were able to get troops on the ground via this Operation Sea Lion, which maybe was based on maybe the Operation Sea Lion has some sort of historical basis, but nonetheless, it's a fictionalized event during World War II. But interestingly, this board game then takes that made-up battle of Berkham-Stokes and then pretends that can be used as a training simulation, or uses that as a training simulation for you, the player, who in this game, when playing this game, is a potential officer in the British Army. So when you're reading the rulebook for this game, the writing is such that you're this officer in training, trying to be a British commander, and it's a very interesting concept of a game almost within a game. But the one thing that I need to point out now is as much as I would still consider this a war game, relative to so many other games out there, a very battle-hardened grognard might say, oh, this isn't really a true war game, because it does lack maybe some elements that a lot of war games are typically going to incorporate, such as morale and just a lot of things that you typically see in a traditional war game. But in my opinion, it's still a war game. You're still fighting units. You're still rolling for combat resolution. But I would say it's like a 50% war game. The other 50% of this is the story itself. The fact that in this game, there's at least 10, maybe more citizens that have names that you're controlling and moving around the map to defend these German invaders. And each of these citizens has their own little background story that is described to you in this intelligence briefing booklet, which is almost like a short novella of sorts. And then throughout the game, you're also drawing from this citizen deck of cards, and each card has some sort of historical event that citizen somehow experienced during this battle of Berkham-Stokes, and that then introduces gameplay elements and changes and things that you now have to consider. And meanwhile, one of these citizens is actually a spy for the German forces, and that spy is codenamed the Chaplain, and you're trying to also figure out who that is while you're defending the village of Berkham-Stokes from the oncoming German invaders. So, besides the fact that the theme of this game really was unique and stood out to me, I also thought the game looked extremely appealing. The map of the game, which I will be laying out on my table soon, was one of the nicest looking war game maps I've ever seen. So So it just it aesthetically looked really appealing to me. But I've yet to actually play this game. So maybe I'm hyping this game up for no reason. Maybe it's a good thing this game has yet to see another print run, as far as I know, since it was originally published. But on the other hand, maybe this is kind of a diamond in the rough that just simply didn't get the kind of exposure it deserved. And by doing this video, maybe I generate enough interest that some publishing company decides that this is a game that is worthy of a reprint. So let's find that out together. I'm ready to get this game to the table. So let's not waste any more time. All right, so I have a game of Codeword Cromwell set up and ready to play. Before I get started, a few things I want to point out. First, to avoid the glare that I normally see on the board when I play games because of my light above the table, I tried to cover it with paper, and I feel like maybe that creates a too dark of table. And then I have a light off to the side. So if this is too dark, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try to think of a different idea in the future to try to minimize glare on the board from my lighting, but hopefully this isn't too bad. Next, I want to do an official reveal of my new board game tweezers, counter tweezers. I always was jealous of the grognards on that I'd see doing videos with their cool counter tweezers, so I had to go and get my own. And this one actually even comes with a light here that now there we go. Yeah, so I can do that. That's kind of cool. But of course, this game, the counters are actually too big for these counter tweezers, so I don't know if I'll really use them other than to point at things. All right, so with that said, I want to give a high-level overview of the game. I'm not going to give a rules explanation. I'm going to kind of explain things as I go, but a few things I want to point out before we get started is, first, the object of the game is essentially to survive 16 turns. Surviving means preventing the Germans from capturing the church. Also, at the beginning of any game of Codeword Cromwell, you roll to determine 4 what are called primary defensive locations that you also need to keep protected from the Germans, and if at any point in the first 8 turns those locations all 4 of them become captured by the Germans, you lose. So in the case of this particular game, I already did the roll, and there's supposed to be tokens that say primary defensive location, I think, on them, and I didn't see them in the game box, so I'm wondering if that was a printing mistake. So instead I'm using these anti-tank markers to denote that it's a primary defensive location. But the 4 that I ended up rolling for are the Cricket Pavilion, the main road over here, the Westwoods location down here. Oh, let me use my tweezers. And then finally, the bridge over there. Now, in case of all the other counters you see currently on the map, the game does come with this counter setup chart, and it details in wording where every single relevant counter is supposed to be placed, but it also gives this nice diagram of where every counter is placed on the board. And then every game, there are 5 different units that you get to place wherever you want. With that said, what are units? Well, as the British player, you have access to essentially 5 different types of units. The first kind of unit is called a character unit. So in this game of Codeword Cromwell, we have 12 uniquely named characters. All of these characters have some sort of backstory to them, and these characters are essentially just random villagers of the town of Berkhamstokes. They're basically just like you or me. They really had no prior combat experience. Maybe the exception is this is the police officer, Sergeant Drake, who ideally has some sort of weapons training, but for the most part, the characters are similar to Miss Featherlake, who's a teacher, You have this journalist guy named Drayden Fox. You have the farm girl named Daisy Woods. And each of these characters has, like I said, their own backstory. They also have their own combat characteristics and movement values printed here. So the first value is their range combat. Second value is their melee combat or hand-to-hand combat. And their last value is their movement value. And I'll, as I said, explain how those values are used as I play the game. But that's the first kind of unit that you will have at your disposal. And when I say backstory, to give a little more explanation, there's this intelligence briefing booklet that has a bunch of game information you'll need to reference, including then, if you want, the background on each of these characters. It's mostly flavor text, although it is important to point out, every character does have a unique, in addition to the fact that they have their own unique statistics shown on the counter, they also have one unique ability that's listed on this chart that's included, double-sided chart that's included in the game. All of them are vastly different. Some are combat-oriented and improve the results of combat rolls. Some are just related to this chaplain check thing that I'll explain briefly. And ones like just this Daisy, for example, the farm girl, just is able to move can move through German occupied squares, which normally you can't, but she can move through German squares if she needs to. So that's important to note about the character units. Next, you have what are called the home guard units, which are these guys. These are essentially, they have a name. They do have an individual name. And maybe on average, they're slightly better at combat than the other characters. One benefit is that they can use both what's called like village weapons and then army weapons. I forgot the exact designation of the two types of items in this game, and now I feel like I have to do a quick reference. Yeah, there's two types of weapons, non-specialist weapons as well as khaki weapons. So the khaki weapons, I think, are the ones that the army would normally be using, and then the khaki and the red or pinkish ones means it's a weapon that isn't necessarily a military one, but can be used as a weapon. For example, these darts, they have that red stripe. Obviously, not a type of weapon I assume our soldiers are usually taking into combat, but in the case of this game, is a piece of equipment that can be used as a weapon. Okay, so then, regular units, or home guard units, are those guys. Then you have sergeants and leaders, essentially, which have a rank listed in their bottom right corner. These guys probably are a little more effective on average than the home guard units. And then you have villager units. Villager units are counters that actually represent more than one actual entity. So they're this South Sussex hunt group represents a group of individuals that thematically are part of this South Sussex hunt group. They typically, I think, have a little better combat values than just a single character. But other than that, nothing really special about those units other than that's just another type of unit that you can have, and they can carry, I think, more pieces of equipment. And then last but not least, you have then actual regular soldiers. And these don't start on the board. They're off to the side and may or may not come onto the board as you play the game. And these units are unique in that they don't have to carry a weapon for ranged combat. I haven't explained that yet, but in order to do a ranged combat attack, the character or villager unit has to be equipped with a weapon that allows for ranged fire. So, for example, the McGowan here comes starts the game with this Webley, which allows him then to do a ranged combat attack. Over here in the pub, there aren't any ranged weapons up here for Betty Tanner, the barmaid, or the pub regulars to use. So none of them could currently use a ranged combat attack. And what they instead have are these pieces of equipment that are for close combat attack. And that's denoted by the fact these pieces of equipment have the parentheses around that number, which, again, I'll explain at some point how combat works and what the numbers mean. But that's what makes these regular units kind of powerful, because they don't have to worry about having a piece of equipment, and their ranged combat values are really good on their own. Like, typically, a unit has a base, any character or villager or home guard has like a 1 or 2 for their ranged combat modifier, and then the weapon itself usually is only a 1 or 2, so those regular units are really strong. In addition to the regular infantry, there are regular tanks and armor that could potentially come into the board, and that is what you will have at your disposal as the British player in this game. Then, in terms of the German units are essentially more or less the same. They are just, they're all German units, nothing special, except each of them is organized by a different division. So there's this 20th Regiment or division, there's this 5th Regiment, and so on. There's a 1st and a 12th, 2nd, 7th, and they're called Fliegers or something like that, okay, so the 7th Regiment, 5th Regiment, 1st Regiment, 20th Regiment, and then the Germans also have tanks, in addition to their infantry. So, okay, so there's the official names I was looking for. The 7th Flieger, the 5th Light Infantry, 1st Light Infantry, 20th Mechanical Infantry, and then the Light Panzer and Heavy Panzer. And these guys come out on the board over time, and you'll see how it works shortly. But essentially, you don't have to. The game is structured such that you're never going to have a Light Panzer come out the first round of the game, and if at all, potentially. So, and their numbers really just don't have a huge impact on combat. I think that the number just means the higher the number, the more likely or easier it is for them to just penetrate or move through the squares towards the church. So, but that's the German units. All right, what else I want to cover before we get started? The various cards up there. There's 4 decks of cards. There's these strategy cards for the British and German player, German AI, the British human player, that you will be drawing during the game. We'll eventually be doing that. Then there's these tactical cards that I don't necessarily think are always helpful, but eventually we will be drawing these. And then there's this deck of character event cards, and this is where kind of the role-playing thematic element of the game comes out, in that you're drawing these character cards that I think are all related to one of the characters, or sometimes these cards explain how these characters are interacting with each other. I mean, keep in mind this is a small town. I think more or less all these characters know each other to some degree, so these cards kind of provide a storyline that, since there's so many of them, I'm sure you don't draw all within one game. So from game to game, you might have a different kind of story that unfolds amongst the characters. Anyway, so that's a deck you pull a card from every round, I believe. And then there's some various other counters that are off board, that are told to stay off board. So those might come on. Those are potentially coming into play based on the cards you're drawing. They might say, take this counter and put it on the board wherever. And then in this bag, I have all the equipment tokens that are supposed to be potentially get drawn whenever you're drawing for equipment. And this is how you are able to get more weapons Because if you've maybe already noticed, a lot of the units that I just said can't attack unless they have a weapon, don't have weapons. Therefore, the only way they can get weapons is by finding equipment. And during the game, you have opportunities to draw for equipment, and you do it's always a random draw. And this does not come with the game. This bag, I think this came from, I believe it came from one of my Chip Theory games. I want to say, but the rules say try to find some sort of the more evocative of a counter holder you have, the better. And I thought this was better than just a plastic bowl. Anyway, so I have a bunch of equipment in here that I'll be drawing from, and I think that covers all the major counters. Oh, and then over here, or major piece components, over here we have a turn track. Essentially, we need to survive till turn 16, and then there's this invasion track. The invasion track we want to prevent from going down as much as possible. It will go down over time for various reasons, but essentially this is a way to, this thematically is kind of a way to judge the current progress of the German invasion of Great Britain. So you want to prevent it from getting it to this 15th space, because then it says the German troops are parading down the mall. So essentially they took over the town. Because, this is a small, this is like a small skirmish, but part of a much larger, obviously, invasion force that's coming up Great Britain. So your success in this small battle is basically kind of preventing this huge invasion from actually succeeding, which is why this battle, even though it's make-believe, in the game, this battle is important for that reason. Like, even though it's a small skirmish, the defense of this town actually has implications on the success of the German invasion as a whole. Is how I interpret it, anyway. And there is this whole, then, chaplain track up there. In short, one of the 12 characters on the board is actually a double agent. They're actually, on the German side, they're a Nazi, whatever you want to call them. And you, as the player, are trying to figure that out as you play the game. You do not have to figure it out. If you get to turn 16 and never find out who the chaplain is, that's okay. At some point, I think in the game, the chaplain maybe does reveal they call him the chaplain. That's like the code name for that. And it gets confusing because sometimes I'm saying things which I don't know are make believe that this game makes up. Chaplain being a code word for a double agent. I don't know if that actually historically is a word that was used to describe a double agent, or if that's just for this game that the designers like, oh, we're going to call the double agent Chaplain. I'm guessing because of Charlie Chaplin, as a joke on Charlie Chaplin is my assumption. Anyway, long story short, there's a character in the game that actually is double agent. There's a mechanic in the game that allows you to try to figure out who that double agent is. Up there in the right corner of the giant board here is a way for you to keep track of that. Essentially, well, actually, maybe it's best I just pull this out. So essentially, you have the people. Every character starts as a person of interest, and then over time you move. Ideally, are moving people over to this left side, which means that they're guaranteed not to be the chaplain. And then eventually, I think you just find the one person who's 18B again. Not sure if that actually means something or if it's just for the game, and that is the chaplain. But at the end of the day, you're just rolling dice to determine who is the chaplain, and it changes from game to game. And yeah, so what else is there to say? And then the combat is resolved using the die over here. There's a lot of different die rolls actually to kind of progress these tracks that you'll notice. But I think that gives a decent enough overview of the game. I know I didn't explain everything in detail, and like I said, that's because I just want to get this game started so you can see how it actually plays out. And I just want to make sure that I'm not... Oh, yeah. These counters. Okay. So, as the game progresses, the Germans most likely are going to start to take over the squares on the various squares on the map here. once they take over a square, meaning they move in, there's no British units in the way, they move in, you put a German control marker in that square, and it's a permanent control marker. So unlike, I say this game is similar to Pandemic in some ways, but unlike Pandemic, where you can eventually remove those disease cubes in Codeword Cromwell, once you lose a territory or area, it's gone for good. You can't ever take it back. So it kind of really makes every single square on the map that important. Like once you lose it, it's gone forever. So I think that's kind of a cool, in a way, idea. It's very simple, but also I think kind of fun, because I assume over time you really feel like you're getting suffocated as these areas around the board become German occupied, preventing you from ever taking them back. So that's Codeword Cromwell in a nutshell. Now let's get started. Okay, so since I don't really know of a better way of going about this, I'm gonna play this game essentially reading through the rulebook with you guys, because there's just, even though I will say now I do not think this game is complicated by any means, there's just a lot of steps to go through in one round, and I just am not going to be able to learn this game well enough to remember all of it on my own. So the first part that you do is called the pre-invasion segment, which essentially is the time of this event where the Germans haven't actually arrived yet, and the town of Berkham-Stokes has time to prepare. So, as mentioned here, you draw one equipment counter from the equipment container and place it in any square. You may then take any one equipment currently on the board and place it in any square of your choice, observing stacking limits. And it says stacking limits. My understanding is, I didn't think there was a stacking limits for equipment, but let's just quick read here. The village defenders are subject to stacking restrictions. Each square may not contain more than 5 stacking points. Yeah, so I'm kind of confused then why equipment limits. So character and the home guard may carry 1 piece of equipment each. Villagers may carry 3. So I still don't see an issue with, in terms of number of equipment markers that go on 1 space though. So let's draw and see what we get. And we got, this is like the worst one, of course, so sabotaged. Now a sabotaged token, and this is one of the complaints about the game, to be honest, is there's a lot of rule referencing. So right now already I have to figure out what sabotage means. I know it's in here. These counters reflect the activities of Chaplain, who somehow managed to access the crypt in the days leading up to the battle, though the church was nominally under the protection of the home guard during that period, blah, 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 blah. If a sabotage counter is drawn, immediately return it to the equipment container. And then exception on Rule 8C. So I'm going to assume it just means I lost my counter draw was useless there. Yeah, I don't know. This is where it's already, the rules aren't very clear for, that's I think meant for the invasion segment, which we aren't in yet. That rule was meant, we're still in this pre-invasion segment. I'm just going to assume that you would still follow the same rule for the pre-invasion segment, meaning it goes back into the equipment bag. So now we do an alert phase. We roll 1d6 if the result is greater than the current pre-invasion turn number. Advance the turn marker 1 space and conduct a new deployment phase. And if the pre-invasion turn marker turn number is represented by, okay, so basically I think I'm rolling a die, and if it's a 1, we move on to the actual invasion segment. If not, then we get to basically draw for another encounter or equipment counter. So it's a 3. Therefore, we don't move on to the invasion segment yet, and then we just do what it says, which I think says draw 1 equipment or advance the turn marker 1 space. All right, simple enough. We did that, and we do another deployment, which is okay. Already, I'm making mistakes. Drawing the equipment counter was just one thing, and then you may take any unit already on the. You may take any one unit on the board and place it in any square of your choice. Oh my gosh, yeah. So this is my first time playing the game. I have no significant interest right now in trying to figure out how to do things different. So I'm just going to keep everything as is. So we do then another deployment phase, and hopefully this time get something a little more interesting to use. Okay, this time it's shotgun. That's much, much better. This is a weapon that's ranged, that has a combat factor of 2. So that's fantastic. It says we can then place it, and place it in any square of your choice. So what I want to do is give this shotgun, of course, to a unit that is going to take advantage of it the most. And right now, I'm thinking of giving it to these Women's Institute ladies because they already have a ranged factor of a 2. So then by having an actual weapon, they can take advantage of that in combat. So there you go. They now have the shotgun. And now I think you may then take 1 unit currently on the board and place it in any square of your choice. Oh, okay. So, see, this is where the game, again, is probably a little nuanced. Technically, you don't just, give this, according to the rules, I don't just give it to someone. I place it in a square. And in terms of the square I want to place it in, I'm trying to think of then where I basically want to place the Women's Institute. And I'm just going to place them over here in the South Stream, I guess. Or no, I guess I'll put them on the bridge. Let's just see what happens. It's kind of maybe a spicy location. But maybe they can hold it. So now they're technically kind of, you could say, equipped with that shotgun, but anyway, in terms of how the game rules are written, technically, I would place the item equipment there, then I get to move the Women's Institute wherever I want, so I'm going to put them there as well, so then in a future combat phase, they have access to that shotgun. Now we do the alert phase again. And you want a high number. So basically I want a 3 or more, because if it's a 2 or 1, I have to move on to the invasion segment, which means no more equipment drawing for free. And it's a 2. So, unfortunately, that means we are going to have to move on to that invasion step. And let me just double check exactly what I need to do here. If the result is equal to or less the current pre-invasion turn number, the invasion is underway. The pre-invasion turn number is represented by the current location of the turn marker. So return the turn marker to turn number 1. So I move that up to the 1, and then place the invasion marker in space 2 of the invasion track, and proceed to the invasion segment. So the invasion track is over there, and let me zoom in on it for you guys. So here is where it started. Invasion imminent. Each of these are named. And now we move over to the next turn on the invasion track, which says paratroopers. So large-scale paratroop landings have been reported across southern England. Reports of heavy machine gun fire. So essentially, I think that's what we're going to be doing next is resolving, these paratroopers that are going to be appearing, which we'll have to find out where they show up. So now we're on the invasion segment, and it says the invasion segment recreates the detail, blah, 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 blah. So since we're this is turn 1 now of the invasion segment, we do skip a lot of these first few steps. So skipped, this part skipped, strategy event phases skipped. Interest is for equipment phase, weapons and other equipment are drawn and supplied to the village defenders. So we still get an equipment phase. And a quick read of that. So equipment during the equipment phase, draw 1 equipment counter from the equipment container. And what makes, so the biggest change here, and this is what I thought was even the case for those pre-invasion equipment draws, is that this equipment has to go straight to the church, which definitely is frustrating because that means you don't just get to place it on the front line, and that means you need to have a unit pick it up and move it if you want to use it. So I got this Fugas, yeah. It looks like a flamethrower, but it has an asterisk on it. So that has to go in the church area. And out of curiosity, let's just take a look at what that actually does. Because I'm curious, and I'm sure maybe you guys are as well. And there we go, Fugas. Oh, it's a mine. Okay, I thought it was like a flamethrower. Oh my gosh. There's a lot of text here for this item or piece of equipment. So it was improvised device made by a couple of the characters in the game. To use this, place the counter in or adjacent to the schoolhouse. Place it in or adjacent to the schoolhouse, the garage, or any square containing Miss Featherlake or James Arnold. Okay. And to move the weapon, it must be carried by a villager's unit, or 2 or more characters, or home guard units. So I guess it's like really heavy. When it has been placed in the desired target square, it must be armed. Immediately when it is placed, it must be armed. Roll 1d6. It could detonate prematurely. So it's a mine that I guess gets placed. And actually, it just so happens that it turned out it was a good idea to keep this villager's unit. Put them in the church because they will be able to carry that wherever I want to place it in a future in the movement step. So that was the equipment draw. All right, now we skip these next couple phases because it's turn 1, and we do the German placement phase. And now let's jump to that section. Okay, so determine which individual regiments are assaulting the village by examining the current location of the invasion marker. As the marker advances, which represents the advance of the German landing forces, the number of units assaulting the village will increase and the direction of their attacks will become more varied. So right now, we only have a few Germans that are assaulting us, and they're going to most likely just come from one area. By the end of the game, we're going to have all the types of German divisions attacking us from all four compass directions, essentially, is kind of what's going on here. So, since the invasion marker position is at a 2 over there, only this 7th Flieger Corps will be coming out onto the map. So German initial placement. German initial placement is conducted for each activated regiment in turn, using activated units not previously placed. Units activated for the first time or destroyed. Blah, blah, blah. The process is identify which regiments are or are about to be activated, which is just that 7th Flieger Corps. Now we roll 2d6 and cross-reference with the German assault direction table. This tells you the map edge which the unit will enter from. Okay, so map edge. So turn 1 to 3. So this, I guess, tells you the map edge. So we're rolling for this chart essentially. And let's see, I'll do 2d6. It's a 12. Okay. And a 12 is the east side of the map. And see, this is where it's like, I wasn't jumping ahead. Like, statistically, west is going to be the most obvious place then for the Germans to come out. Therefore, it would have been most strategic for me to kind of beef up the western side of the map, which I wasn't really thinking about since this was my first playthrough. But anyway, so they're coming over on this side of the map. I think that's east, yeah, east. So, well, actually, let me double check. Yep, that's definitely east. Okay. And then after we have determined the map edge, we roll a 2d6 again, and we look at then these red numbers on the side to determine which actual area or square they approach in. And okay. So I roll 2d6s again. This time it's an 8. So just to kind of zoom in if you guys don't see it very well, on this map edge, there's these each square has numbers from 1 through 12 on it, which represent where the Germans will actually be coming in. And as shown here again, just to reiterate, this anti-tank marker is saying that this is a primary defensive square, this main road space. So the Germans, in fact, are going to be coming in this square since I rolled that 8. So, and now what's kind of difficult to explain very well, but this is actually its own square. It's like a small square, but it's like its own square. So, you know, I still occupy the main road even though the Germans spawn here. So the Germans are going to come out here, but they don't automatically just take over this space. They have to fight to take this main road. So this is kind of like its own little area, but it's an area that I can't occupy. Only the let me use my only the Germans can occupy that space. That's where they spawn essentially. All right. So now that we figured that out, it says that we do a 2d6 a third time, and then we compare it to the German assault table. This indicates how many units will be placed in the approach box. Okay, approach box is the correct term for that small square. So, just in case you guys were wondering, here is the chart to determine how many number of units are actually getting placed. So I'll first roll the 2d6 a third time. This time it's a 3. So, referencing that chart, a number 3 dictates that, oh my gosh, 4 German units get placed of that 7th Flieger. So we go over here to the stack of the 7th Flieger units, which are these guys. We take 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we place them on the square over there, which again, I'm already forgetting my terms. I apologize. The approach box. Okay. Repeat the process for each activated regiment. So the only activated regiment was the 7th Flieger. So we're done doing activations. And then it says, if not enough units which isn't an issue. Stacking, there's no stacking for German units. And we don't have to worry about armor. And then once all eligible units have been placed, flip any off-board German infantry units currently of their KIA side to their full strength side. So, and then, it clarifies on here, we can never, British can never occupy those approach boxes. So that was the German placement phase. Now we do the British combat phase. Village defenders fire at the Germans and engage in close combat. So I have to make a choice here as to, wait, is that right? Yeah. German placement. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. Yeah, I was thinking about German movement. The German units move. Okay. So I don't think they move because, well, let's just read through that section. Movement is conducted by advancing units from the north and south of the board in a vertical direction and from the east and west in a horizontal direction. So these German units, the church is their objective, of course, so they're pretty much moving straight towards that church. German units in squares or approach boxes not adjacent to a British unit move in the German movement phase. So they're adjacent to this main road square, and that main road square does have British units with ranged weapons. So as a result, they do not move. They do have to stay put in that approach box. So there's a lot more stuff on moving, but I think that kind of just summarizes moving. So we move next to the British combat phase, where we get to fire at the Germans finally. And how does that work? Well, again, it's not over. There's a lot of steps here. I'm going to try to distill this as much as possible for you guys, though. Essentially, if I have units that can conduct ranged fire, that's the first part of the combat phase. I decide that now. And I think for sure Sergeant Taylor here can do ranged fire with his Lanchester. Because this is a ranged weapon, and then he already has a base value of 3, and this Lanchester adds 2 to that, and that's the number of die he would be rolling. And then this 5 to 6 denotes that he actually will be getting hits on a 5 or a 6. Normally a hit's only scored on a 6, so that's a great benefit too. So this weapon is then really strong for both the reasons of it gives him 2 extra dice and allows for hits scored on a 5 or 6. This other guy, which is considered a home guard unit, Clark is his name, he has a ranged value of 1, and his weapon is a Mills, which is like a grenade, I guess. And I have to double check the... that's another example of a weapon that I need to confirm. It has special rules of some sort, I believe. So it's a Mills bomb. It scores with a roll of a 6. Okay, so it's, yeah, as a normal weapon, it hits on a 6, and then immediately after it's used, you roll 1d6, and then if it's a 1 or 2, it's returned to the equipment container. So it's like, he only has a certain amount of these grenades, and that kind of, I guess, is a way to simulate that. So it's possible if he does shoot here, he might no longer have a weapon for the future. So, and then, yes, range combat is resolved 1 unit at a time. So, because of that, I think for sure I have Sergeant Taylor shoot first, and see if I need to have the other guy fire as well. So maybe I will quick go through the steps. We conduct each attacking unit to be carrying a firearm, which the guy does. Okay. Attack factor. Uppermost right number on the counter. So as we discussed, it's a 3 for Taylor. Weapon factor. That's a 2 for the Lanchester rifle, I guess, or I think it's a rifle. If you wanted to learn more about it, it does have like a section in the intelligence briefing, but I'm not going to dig through that right now. Attack dice. Add the attack factor to the weapon factor. So 3 plus 2 is 5. Conduct an attack roll with the appropriate number of attack dice. And then it describes here that if the weapon does have that black triangle, which shows 5 or 6, that means a 5 or 6 is a hit, not just the 6. So, why don't we go ahead and do that? I will roll 5 die to see, and I want 5s or 6s. I got 1 5. Wow, not a very exciting roll there. So 1 5 essentially means 1 hit. Each hit results in the mover 1 German infantry unit and place it off board on its KIA side. So I will take one of the 7th Flieger, I flip it to its KIA, we'll put it next to the 7th Flieger stack over there. And then I'm reading this thing about the specialist weapons, which wasn't the case. Specialist weapons, are the khaki weapons, which was the case for the Lanchester, but Sergeant Taylor has both khaki color and this red color, meaning he can use both specialist and non-specialist weapons. So that's not an issue. It's also not a two-handed weapon, so I don't need to worry about that. Number of attacks. Oh shoot! No, wait, that's not a character. I was gonna say, so, I meant sometimes there's character special rules. I'm trying to figure out if, I honestly, I'm going to go ahead. Why not let Clark take a attack roll as well? So Clark normally hits on normally rolls just 1 die for range combat. The Mills grenade gives him 3 more die, so that's a total of 4 die that he will be rolling, and he only is hitting on a 6 because there's not that black triangle in the upper left corner of his weapon. And he got a 6. So that's great. I did that. At least that's one more 7th Flieger. That is KIA. So flip him over to KIA. And now, as noted in that briefing booklet, we do have to roll to see if that Mills grenade gets expended. So we're hoping for a 3, 4, 5, or 6. It's a 2, of course. That means he no longer has this Mills grenade, and the rules say it just goes back to the equipment bag in hopes that we draw it again. Okay, so that was both of them. They both took range combats. Now we do have one last step, which is the train modifier roll. So once all the combats have been conducted, we do a terrain modifier roll, which is kind of, I don't really know what the best way of explaining what this is simulating. It's supposed to, somehow it's simulating their terrain advantage. They're like in this, Taylor and Clark had some sort of great location. They were ready to shoot at these Germans, and as a result, this terrain modifier is representing that kind of prepared attack the quality of that prepared attack. So, okay, well, it's reflecting the advantage of defending and attacking from different buildings and type terrain. So the one on the left is the British units, is used for British when British are attacking. The one on the right is used for the Germans when they're attacking the British units in the square. Very kind of unique way of handling terrain modification. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that, but just bear with me as we go through this. So all I have to do is roll basically 2 die, and each die may be used to launch one attack on German units occupying a square that has just been subjugated to ranged combat attack. A 6 is a hit. Yeah, so it's like 2 bonus. Put it very simply, I'm rolling 2 bonus dice, and I want 6s, and I got 1 and 4. So terrain modifier did not help me there. All right. So that will take us to close combat. Close combat replicates those moments during the battle when British and German forces engaged in what may be loosely termed hand-to-hand. Close combat attacks are only conducted by units that did not engage in range combat. All right. So immediately, both Clark and Taylor are excluded from even having the option to do close combat because they did do range combat. Also, it's important to note, close combat does allow then the Germans to fight back. With range combat, as you just saw, I get to shoot at the Germans; they don't get to shoot back right away. So, there's a huge advantage there. With close combat, you do get to. It's not simultaneous. The results of the British die rolls for close combat are resolved first, but then the surviving Germans do get to fight back. So you do run the risk of potentially, shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak. But anyway, that's the British combat phase. We're done with that. We move on now to the German combat phase. And German combat is resolved 1 square at a time. All units in a square belonging to the same regiment attack the same target square. So there's only one square with Germans in it. They're all part of the same regiment, so they are attacking the same target. If there are only one adjacent square containing British units, all German regiments in a particular square will attack that square, which is the case here. And if there's more than one adjacent square containing British units, then there's this priority chart, which you don't need to worry about. Combat procedure. Identify which regiments will fire first, so there's only the one. And then count how many units from the regiment that are firing, which is just 2, since thankfully I did get those 2 KIAs earlier. And then identify the terrain modifier. This is the number to the right of the slash in the square being targeted. And add this number to the German combat factor. So I'll zoom in here just in case it's hard to see. But again, this is a terrain modifier. The left number is a terrain modifier for my units shooting at these Germans. And now the German modifier is the number on the right here when targeting my units in this square. So their numbers are 0. So this is actually a pretty nice square in that it gives me an advantage and when I'm attacking out of it, and it gives the German no advantage when they're attacking me in it. All right, so now that we figured that out, we move on to German control markers. Count how many German control markers are adjacent to the British square being targeted, including the control marker in the square launching the attack. Add this number to the German combat factor and the German terrain modifier to give the total number of German attack dice used in this attack. So essentially it kind of is a way that rewards the Germans for taking up, taking over squares. It's also a kind of an incentive, if there's not enough already, but another incentive for the British unit player to really try to prevent the Germans from taking over any squares at all, because it just kind of turns into this domino effect that those squares are going to make it easier to provide then a bonus when the Germans are attacking further squares in the future. But in this case, they're in this approach box, which doesn't count, as far as I'm aware, as then a control marker. So they don't get a bonus for that. And now we roll the attack dice for the Germans, which will just be 2 die, and they are only hitting on a 6. So let's just hope no 6s. I get a 6. God. Oh my God. All right. So I need to quick check to see. Unlike German units, British units are not destroyed when first hit. Instead, the counter is flipped to its injured side, and then any British unit hit a second time is then killed. All unit hits on a British occupied square are distributed amongst the units based on the British casualty priority table. So first they would be attributed to regular, which there's none. Then it's home guard, which is what this guy is. Oh, interesting. Sergeant Taylor is not till 4, so that's good. I kind of not that I have anything against Mr. Clark here, but so Clark gets hurt, and now he gets flipped over. Essentially, his range modifier now is a 0, which he doesn't have a ranged weapon anyway, so that's not so bad. His close combat now is a 9, which it was before anyway, and his movement is reduced to just a 3. So he's not as mobile as he's wounded, but all right. And then hits are attributed to uninjured units before injured. And so British casualties, there wasn't any additional attacks. Repeat the procedures are outlined above for each individual regiment in the square, which there's none. And then once all ranged attacks have been resolved, repeat the process above for any other squares, which there's none. So now we do this the German advance phase, I believe, is next. Yep. So advance. At the end of the German combat phase, if the next square is empty of British units, any German units not adjacent to a British unit with a ranged weapon advance to that square. But although we took a casualty there, or a wound, we still maintain control of that main road, so the Germans are not able to advance. And that takes us to the recovery phase. Yeah, so I think we skipped that recovery phase. There we go. If there are any German units, okay, that's not the case, that's not the case, nothing. Treat injuries. Injured units may receive medical attention. And in short, I can potentially treat an injury if I had a medical kit, which I currently don't. The medical kits are currently off the board right now, so at some point I'm guessing there's event cards that can bring them onto the table or onto the board to potentially hope to heal Clark. And then that is the first turn of Codeword Cromwell. I'm going to so we have a surgery location here, and in the surgery is Dr. Greystone. Now, Dr. Greystone does have an ability that I know relates to healing. So I just wanted to quick reference it. First aid can heal in his square on a roll of 6. So, okay, so he's like a mobile med kit. I think a med kit allows you to heal regardless if Dr. Greystone's with you. Dr. Greystone can otherwise heal you on his own without even needing a medkit. So in theory, if I'm able, I could potentially move Clark to the surgery and try to get him healed. But anyway, so that is then the first turn of Codeword Cromwell. We move down that turn track, and I might do one more full turn, and for the sake of time, maybe just conclude after that. So hope this has been exciting so far. All right, so let's move on to turn 2, and I'm noticing, there we go, turn 2, and I realize I did make one small kind of mistake when resolving the German combat. So the way I was doing it was I was just simply counting the number of units they had, which was 2, and then that was the number of die they would roll, since there was no terrain modifier for the Germans attacking. Actually, what you do is you count the number of units that are attacking for the Germans, and then reference it with this chart here to determine the combat factor, or the number of die they're rolling. So in the case of this 7th Flieger unit, they had two actual units in the square, which in fact means they're rolling 3 dice instead of just 2. And quickly looking at this table, it seems for whatever reason that 7th Flieger regiment is much more effective than these other regiments for whatever reason. Again, like historically speaking, not sure if that is historical or not, but at least in this alternate history, that apparently is an effective German unit. I'm not going to roll that missing die just because now we're on to turn 2, but I do want to point out my mistake. So with that said, we have a few now phases in the turn or invasion segment that we didn't do the first for the first turn because it tells us to skip on the first turn. So now we'll actually be doing those, and the first of which is the strategy event phase. And essentially, during the strategy event phase, to summarize, we get to choose if we want to draw a German strategy card or a British strategy card. A German strategy card typically is good for the Germans for some reason, and then depending on what it says, of course. And the British strategy cards are generally good for the British. But the downside is if you draw a British strategy card, you don't then get to draw a tactical event card, which I think is generally a good thing for the British player. And if you draw a German strategy card, I think that means not only are you drawing something that's potentially good for the Germans, but then you're more likely to move the invasion track forward. And again, one of the losing conditions is if that invasion track goes all the way to the end. And honestly, I might be mixing these things up, but we're just going to make a decision and go with it. So I've decided I'll do the German strategy card, and the rules just say pick a deck, and then you always have to draw from one of the decks. Okay, I draw one German strategy card, and it says 18 and tanks ashore quickly. So what that means is I think you read what it said, or you're supposed to look up and do what it says. Actually, it doesn't say that in the rule book. Oh, yeah. So then I look in here to find the strategy event 18, tanks ashore quickly, Rommel's insistence that panzers be included in large number, blah, blah, blah. Flavor text. Okay, so it's a bunch of flavor text and then +1 at the end. And that +1's a modifier that will become relevant soon. So then I roll one red d6 and a blue d6. And I'm reading as I do this here. If a British strategy card was drawn, which it wasn't, if a German strategy card was drawn, add the event's C line modifier to the number on the blue d6. So I'm adding 1 to the result of the blue die. And the red die result is whatever the red die is. Okay, so the blue is a 2 and the red's a 4. If the modified value of the blue die is greater than or equal to the modified value of the red die, advance the invasion marker 1 space. If it's not, the invasion marker is not advanced. So this is a 2 when it's not greater than or equal to the 4, so the invasion marker does not advance. So that's a good thing. That means yay. Because the invasion marker is like representing the progress of the Germans as they're trying to invade Britain. By it not moving, meaning they're not progressing. So that's a good thing. Yay. Okay. Now we move on. Yeah, each strategy event can be... So that's irrelevant. So this is basically then discarded. It's done. Cool. All right. Now why they don't just put the number that I'm modifying the die roll on the card itself is kind of odd to me, but it is what it is. Now we move on to the equipment phase. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. We draw from the handy-dandy equipment bag book, or the equipment bag. See what we get. Hopefully something juicy. And it does make the stipulation for an equipment counter to be drawn, at least one British unit must be present in the church square, and which is this big square right here. It's very big, but it is considered just one actual square on the board. And we have several, although I think thematically and practically speaking, you just keep the Reverend in there probably the whole game, because as a attacking unit, he's kind of useless, and then you get your requirement of having someone in the church. But alright, so we have someone in the church, we get to draw an equipment counter. Let's see what we get. It's a jam. So, I do need to now read about jams. Much of the weaponry used by the Home Guard was obsolete and relatively poorly maintained. If one of these markers are drawn and it's already in play, you replace it with the marker, jam marker. The piece of equipment cannot be used until repaired. As soon as the weapon is repaired, return the marker to the equipment container. If the piece of equipment is not in play, the jam marker is held off board and brought into play as soon as the relevant equipment is drawn. So that means the next time we ever draw this Bren, which I think otherwise would be a great piece of equipment to have drawn, it comes to the board or comes to the game jammed. So that's our luck. I guess I'll put it up there, but I'll hopefully not forget about it. And that's the equipment draw phase. So we move on to the next thing, which is the tactical event phase. And here it says you may draw one tactical event card during the tactical event phase, provided you did not draw a British strategy card. And that's why I didn't want to draw a British strategy card, because I wanted to draw a tactical card, because those sound fun. So we get to draw the top card from the tactical event. And very similar to the strategy card, it's just a picture with the name, Baker Sugar, a number 45, which we get to reference in that briefing booklet. 45. All right. Baker Sugar at about 13.30 hours. The Royal Signal Corps managed to establish field communication posts within the church. Enable the defenders to remain in contact. Special case. A regular or home guard must be present in the church. Yes, we have that. 2 home guards. Actually, this is a home guard, so 3 home guards. And then effect. Acts as if the shop is occupied and British controlled. Well, I think it already is, so this event is deployed for the rest of the game. And then a 6 is listed at the end. So the shop is located here, and I guess this event is saying if the Germans had under control, that now it's back under our control again. So kind of maybe a boring event, relatively speaking, but once chosen, a tactical event is said to be activated, but must be deployed to be played. You may try to deploy it immediately or retain it and try to deploy it in a later turn. Okay. Okay, so maybe that's the catch. The modifier on the map board in the green or red shading on the row modifying on the row containing the invasion marker. So we're on over here, and this I'll zoom in on. So that's what I think these numbers are for. On the left, so since we're on this row of the invasion track, there's a -2 modifier if I wanted to try to deploy the event we just drew. And if I wanted to deploy it, it says roll 2d6. If the roll is greater than the final deployment total, the event is now deployed. Most of them, looks like most of them were. What I saw, a lot of them were 6, and that's what the example here too is. So basically, I roll 2 dice right now. I would have to roll a 8 or higher, and then I get to put this Baker Sugar event into play, which right now is pointless anyway because we already have control of the shop. So I'll just leave it off board for now. In the event, maybe in the future we do lose control of the shop, and I do want to try to activate that event to give us control of the shop for whatever reason. I gotta read that event one more time just to see if I'm missing something about the importance of the shop. The call sign, it enables the defenders to remain in contact. Must be present in the church. Acts as if the shop is occupied and British controlled. Yeah, I'm trying to understand what the relevancy of that would be, because if there's German units in there, theoretically, we wouldn't be able to move in there anyway. If it's German controlled, but no German units, I guess we can move in there, and maybe that means it's helpful because of some special ability over here. No, garage is that one. Yeah, I think I would only... I don't understand the importance of the shop right now. So... Oh well, that was the tactical... But all of that was for the tactical event phase. And now we move on to character event phase, which is simple enough where we just draw a character event card and do what it says, much like the strategy and tactical event cards. And this time, this one's kind of ominous. It's bright red, turn 10 plus in control. So and once again, if you've been paying attention, we have to look it up in this booklet. So it's 115. Death from above. Jeez. As the battle wore on, German commanders became increasingly concerned at their inability to break the resistance of the defenders of the Berkham-Stokes. Just before 1600, 5 Stuka dive bombers appeared in the clear blue skies above the village. That was the moment I was most afraid. The sound, that terrible screaming of their engines. I didn't mind the explosions. It was just that sound. Unnamed villager. So in each square containing one or more British units, roll 3d6s. On each roll of a 6, 1 unit from the square is killed and removed from play. On each roll of a 5, 1 unit from the square is flipped to its injured side. Use the British casualty priority table to allocate hits. And then special case cannot be deployed until turn 10. So at least we have till turn 10 to worry about that event. That sounds devastating. It's not even just one square. That was even let me reread that. In each square containing one or more British units, which means everything, all my units, which means then every single square that had. Wow. Okay. Now the key word is it does have to be deployed, which is kind of interesting, in that the rules say once a new character card event has been drawn, you must attempt to deploy one character event. So it says down here, if any character events do meet their special case criteria, you must choose to deploy one. First, as I already mentioned, we're not at turn 10 yet. That's a ways away, so I don't have to worry about it for now. But let's say it's turn 10. I would theoretically have to try to deploy that unless I had another character event, ideally one that is not so negative, and I could instead try to deploy that one. And honestly, I may hope that I don't have to even worry that my roll fails, so I don't have to worry about deploying this one ever again. Because this one's just so bad. Like, I could see that being very game changing. It just would wipe out a lot of my forces. I'm just trying to see. Yeah, I don't think I roll here. It's just I would just play it. So, yeah. Okay, well that was a character event phase. Normally the character events are character specific. In this case, it wasn't character specific. It affects the whole game. It affects, I guess, all characters, you could say. So, the next phase we move on to is the British movement phase. And village defenders move. So, how that works is it's typical movement rules, orthogonal movement only in this game. But I do have to roll a die for it is a roll and move kind of situation where and I'm reading here just to kind of summarize everything for you guys quickly. There's stacking limit. You can't have more than 5 stacking points in a square. Each unit's worth 5, or each unit is 1 stacking 1 point, except the villagers, these units that are representing more than one human being, are considered 2 points. Oh, and actually, the church where you have 7, which I think is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so I'm almost over occupied in the church. But otherwise, I think every other square is just 5. And you do 1 square of movement at a time. Or you complete the movement for all units in 1 square before moving on to the next. And to move equipment, you have to spend 1 movement point to pick up that piece of equipment. And then you can just drop it wherever. Okay, so first off, I need to decide who I want to move. And I was actually contemplating what to do with this Fugas stuff. And it says it needs to go adjacent or in the schoolhouse or garage. And I feel like just putting it out here. It is because this is a 6, 7, or 8, so enemies are most likely to approach from this square if they ever appear on the western, once they start appearing on the western edge. So that means I would move. I'm just going to take care of the church first, I guess. And how you do movement is you roll a die and you get to roll move that many number of squares, or you get that many movement points. So I get 2, which is crap. So I'm going to still move them. I have to spend 1 movement point though to actually pick up the Fugas, and then they just move 1 more right here. So that's. And the game does not give you a very intuitive way to signal a unit's been moved. I'm just going to turn their square upside down, their counter upside down. Okay, I don't see a need for these other units to be in the church, right? Oh no, actually I take that back. I do want to keep. Well, I want to keep these guys in the church in the hopes they finally get a piece of equipment they can use to fight with, and then I'll send them out. So instead I will move out Webley, or McGowan, who has a Webley. I will move out McGowan, so he has a great movement value. So his movement value thankfully is a 6, which means and I rolled a 6, so he can move up to 6 squares, which is pretty much anywhere then on the board. And then now it's a matter of, okay, where do I feel the need for the most support? And I am thinking the schoolhouse might be a decent location for him to try to get to. Or I could have him reinforce the Women's Institute on the bridge to help hold that. Maybe I'll do that. So I'll move him to the bridge here and flip him upside down. Actually, what is the bridges? Okay, bridges 2 and 2. It's not as good as 2 and 0, but it's a key point. You know, I'm tempted to maybe just try to, but I need them to keep that in preparation for the food. Okay, I'm going to leave it like that. So I'm going to be done with that square. Actually, that's the problem. There's no way to designate that you're done with a square. Yeah. Well, hopefully I can remember. Okay, let's worry up. Do I want to do anything up there? I think consolidating forces makes sense, which means I'm going to move that unit out of that space. So their movement, these guys, or this guy is called Hodges. So I want to roll a 5 or less because his movement is a 5. If I roll a 6, that means he doesn't get to move at all. He rolls a 1, which means he can move in 1 square, which is all I wanted to do anyway. Or wait, now I'm forgetting about stacking. So I can have 5. So right now this is 1, 2, 3. So that's okay. And if I move him in there, then it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's exactly 5. So that's okay. I can get away with that. I'll do the upside down thing like I was talking about. So I'm going to keep what I have there as is. You know, I'm fine with how the pub is. Edith Finlay. So she needs to be with the sergeant because the sergeant is the one who is able to actually do the chaplain check, which I haven't gotten to yet. Oh, wow, okay. So I apologize because the chaplain check is actually not very well spelled out here in the rule book. I think it occurs during the British movement phase instead of making a movement roll. Okay, so in fact, actually, he doesn't make a movement roll. Part of me really wants to get him to the main road to help support that advance by the Germans. I think I still will. Man, that sucks. I still am going to send him that way. Yeah. So I'm just going to not worry about that right now and move the sergeant to the main road location. Or try. He rolled a 1. So I'm just going to bring him down here to the garage, I guess. His movement's over. I'm going to try to get Miss Edith Farley with him. So she's in the shop right now. And her, just so you guys are aware, she's if you read the briefing, you'd find out that she's the town gossip Edith Finlay, and that she's the town gossip, and her ability is to gossip. So she's in the square with the police officer, she helps the roll, gives a +1 modifier to the die roll because she's the gossip, and helps, I guess, figure out who the chaplain is. Anyway, I think there's value then in trying to keep her with the sergeant. She actually rolled perfect. She needed a 3. So 1, 2, 3. And now she is with him in the garage. So maybe next turn I just instead try to... Yeah, this is bad actually, because now I'm debating if I just give up this position to the Germans. Because I feel like I'm otherwise going to have to leave. Yeah, I think that's my best bet. So, what I'm going to do is move for Clark. So, I need Clark to the surgery so he can try to get healed. He rolls a 1. Not good enough to get him all the way to the surgery, but at least he's one step closer. And then I'm moving Taylor, because he has to get out of there. I don't want him by himself. He rolls just a 1, which is all I needed. So I'm going to move him here to the garage. We're going to hold up in this garage, wait for the Germans to advance, and hopefully take some out. Now, stacking limit's 5. I have exactly 5 units worth of stacking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So no more units in the garage. Okay, so that's part... I could... Yeah, and I can't, so that means I can't move the doctor in there. If I wanted to, I could try to move the doctor in there, so then I could still try to heal in this turn, but... First of all, that disobeys the stacking rules, and then also... I don't get the benefit of that surgery with the doctor, which is nice. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. I'm not going to bother moving any of these other people for now because I really have no good idea how to handle movement. Or I don't have any good rationale for moving right now, so I'll keep it as is. Okay, so that means we move to the next phase after British movement phase, which is German movement. Oh wait, it's German placement first. So we did British movement. Now we do German placement. Determine which individual regiments are assaulting the village by examining the current location of the invasion marker, which it's on 2. So it's still on 2, yeah. Identifies which regiments are about to be activated. So it's still just the 7th Flieger Corps. And then roll a 2d6. Yep, okay. So all this is like very simple stuff. It's very simple stuff, but it until you've probably done it several times, it doesn't get committed to memory. So I roll 2 dice. It's a 5, and that means 5 is turn 1 through 3. A 5 is north. So north is where they're going to be spawning, and then we roll twice to see which square, which approach box or whatever it's called. It's a 6. So that makes sense, you know. Statistically speaking, they should be coming in the 6, 7, or 8 square, and that is where this 7th Flieger Corps is going to be visiting us. And then we roll 2 more die one more time to determine the number of 7th Flieger Corps units. It's a 5. And as denoted here, okay, they're hopefully about to get smashed. So I rolled a 5, number of units placed is just 1. So 1 Flieger Corps. Now, I can't take from the stack of KIA units. I have to pick one of the ones that aren't KIA, which we still have plenty left. So I did that, and I would repeat the process for all the other activated regiments, but right now it's just that 7th Flieger Corps, and then we're done. So now we do the German movement phase. You do the east to west, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, these units are going to move in here, and unfortunately, they are going to take control of that space, and that means that they have successfully captured a square that is a primary defense square, but I do think it really was my best option to give them that main road location, so I have now a better chance of defending the garage. Yeah, because they're German units in squares or approach boxes not adjacent to a British unit. Oh, with a ranged... Yeah, this would be ranged, though. So what that means is this square is technically adjacent to a unit... Or no. German units in squares or approach boxes not adjacent to a... Yeah, so that is the case. This approach box is not adjacent anymore to a ranged unit, so they do move up. And then if it did not contain a control marker already, then place one, which I did. And then their line, they keep moving until their line is blocked by a British unit. And that guy automatically stops right away. And that's that, and now we do combat. Alright, so British combat, I think it doesn't really matter which square we do combat for. Identify the square the British units will attack from. Result, square by square. So we do ranged combat first, and we'll just do this defense of the cricket pavilion combat first. So in this square, we have, I'll bring it to show you guys, we have Hodges, which, again, technically these weapons are for anyone, but I am saying it's equipped to Hodges, which is this de Gaulle, which looks kind of like a Molotov cocktail, or maybe essentially is a Molotov cocktail, which does then give him a ranged attack. And I'm going to read what it says about that particular piece of equipment here, because it looks like it might do something. Looks like it has special rules. De Gaulle cocktail. Made famous by French forces during the Battle of France. I have no idea if that's historically accurate. They were primarily constructed in the school chemistry labs. The Gaulle cocktail can only be used by all village defenders. It can be used by all the village defenders. Scores a hit on each roll of a 6, like a normal ranged combat attack. And then if I roll it, I have to then roll it 1d6. If it's a 5 or a 6, I have to return it to the British equipment container, so long as the schoolhouse or garage are still British controlled, which they are. Okay, so ideally you want to hold on to something like that, for the future, but I think any anti-tank weapon is worth trying to hold on to, because not everything can attack tanks. So with that said, we will definitely then have Reynolds conduct his combat first. Oh, and important to note before I move, this is something that I'm going to eventually forget to remember, but always checking to see what the character abilities are. So Reynolds, -1 German terrain modifier. So this 2-1 is actually 2-0, is essentially what that does. So that's good. So when the Germans fight, he's going to really help out. Okay, so we're going to have him do his attack, and what's great is he's got a base attack, range combat attack of 3, and then the shotgun gives him 2. So he's rolling 5 dice total. Unfortunately, his weapon does not give him hits on a 5. It only is hits on the standard 6. I'm gonna do a quick read to see if there's any note about the shotgun in here. It's funny how that is. Like, it doesn't. So, this de Gaulle weapon, clearly you need to read this booklet to understand. You would have to potentially, discard it after the attack. But the counter itself gives you no indication that you need to read something about it. It just kind of assumes you would know this already. So now I feel the same potentially is the case for the shotgun, but it talks just about how they were prevalent, and especially members of the South Sussex Hunt who dubbed Nick Gowan a Little Adolf. So there you go, a little town gossip for you. So anyway, no special rules with the shotgun. Right now I would be rolling 5d6s. Let's just go ahead and take care of this and hope for just there's only one German unit by themselves there. I just need one hit to kill them. 1-6. Oh, thank goodness. I got the 1-6 I needed, which means I don't even have to worry about deciding what to do with Hodges, and therefore this unit is KIA. Oh, and I forgot to flip. I do think you're supposed to flip over the KIA units. Oh no, maybe not yet. Or maybe, yeah. At some point, those KIA units are supposed to flip back. To their non-KIA side. And right now I'm trying to find that. And I'm not immediately seeing it. I know it's in here somewhere. Sorry for the delay here. It's not super relevant right now, but okay. German initial activate for all. German initial placement conducted for each activated regiment using activated units not previously placed. Units activated for the first time or destroyed units no longer displaying their KIA side. Okay. Well, those are still displaying. I'll figure it out later. Anyway, so now we have another KIA unit. So that's great. Now we move over here, where we have 2 German Flieger, 7th Flieger units assaulting this garage location, where I actually have a pretty good defense set up. So I'm going to start my range combat, again with the veteran here, Taylor, with his Lanchester. He rolls 2 + 3 for a total of 5 die and hits on a 5 or 6. Sergeant, in terms of special abilities, so as we've already discussed, Edith is just a town gossip, nothing helpful for combat. Clark is just a home guard unit, so it doesn't really help with combat, or it doesn't have a special ability. Drake just has the ability to potentially arrest or determine who the chaplain is. And then finally, James Arnold can fix weapons, so he doesn't do anything for combat either. All right, with all that enough talk, let's let Taylor try out his Lanchester. Hopefully we get the 2 kills right here. And we did. Wow. 4. Jeez, why didn't he have that the last time? 4 5s. I'm just gonna 4 5s. It's 4 kills, but he just needed the 2. So 2 more KIAs for the Germans, and that's it. There's no German combat. There's no close combat necessary for me. There's no German combat. There's no German advance step. So the that would pretty much take us, I think, right to the British movement, then German placement, German movement, British combat, German combat, German advance, and then recovery phase. And I just want to quick read the recovery phase stuff just to make sure there's nothing I'm missing. Yeah. British characters who are incapacitated may attempt to rally. Other event-driven issues may also be resolved at this time. So then, return to the time marker phase. So that is the end of turn 2. And I'm going to stop my playthrough here. I have done 2 full complete turns. Still a lot of game elements that didn't get showcased yet. At least we got to draw from the card decks. But of course, tanks are still probably several turns away from actually making it on the board, and that it introduces a few other rules. But for the most part, that's how this game plays. They're rule wise, I would say we did cover pretty much everything to some degree, and for sure, it's without any Germans on the board right now, it probably seems like this game is easy. But I can say right now, looking at this chart, that once we start getting to these, once this invasion track starts moving up, you're going to start seeing more activated regiments coming to the board at one time. In theory, I might be placing 6 different regiments worth of units all around this map, which sounds insane. I don't know how you're supposed to deal with that, but yeah, I think these first turns are definitely supposed to be this relaxed, just like a game of Pandemic, which is why, again, you like to reference that this is almost a World War II themed version of that game. So yeah, that's the first 2 turns. I'm going to continue playing this out myself, and then when I'm done, I'll wrap up and give you guys kind of my first impression thoughts, and tell you guys how I feel about this game. And so with that said, I'll be back soon. Well, I finally finished my first game of Codeword Cromwell, and I have a lot of things to say. First off, what were my results? I ended up achieving 78 points when I tallied my score at the end of the game, which, or merits, I guess is what they call them in this game. And 78 merits equates to below average performance, and it says the module has highlighted some issues in relation to leadership skills and tactical awareness, recommended for status 2 review. So maybe I'm not going to be able to be a British general after all. But with that said, yeah, there's a lot of things I have to say about this game, both good and bad. I do want to start off with saying that I timed myself, and with the setup, this took me about 7 hours to play, which seems ridiculous. And I don't think I was actually playing slow by any means. And I don't know what it was specifically that was making me play this game so long. It is 16 turns, which is a lot. And every turn probably took me about 20-30 minutes. So I guess it adds up, but I don't know how long this game normally takes for people to play. Just want to throw that out there. Kind of want to play it again just to see if it was mostly because I was still, referencing the rules a lot, or if this game just takes that long, because that's a little concerning. And that's part of the reason why I wouldn't necessarily be super excited to play this game, is just the fact it took me 7 hours to play. But let's start on some of the things that I didn't maybe appreciate so much about this game, including the game length. But I really don't like to complain about game length, because a good game could take several hours, and regardless of so anyway, in terms of some things that I didn't like so much, first off, let's talk about the thing that I always am most concerned about in a game, and that's the rulebook. So the rulebook in Codeword Cromwell is 27 pages, and does it achieve the objective of having all the rules that you need to play the game? I would say essentially yes. However, this rulebook isn't well organized. There's no index, for example, and there's no illustrated examples of play in the rulebook. They do verbally in text try to explain situations of how the game plays, but that's not very helpful at times, because then you need the board in front of you to even understand what the rulebook is saying. So that's frustrating. Also, there's a sequence of play in the rulebook, and the sequence of play in the rulebook isn't even very clear, because a big part of this game is this chaplain check. And the chaplain check, if you're using, there's different methods to try to figure out who the chaplain is. But the main one is trying to use your Sergeant Drake here to do a interrogation attempt. And that occurs during the movement phase, if you want to try to do that. And if you look at the sequence of play, it doesn't mention that at all. It doesn't say, I would expect under, British movement phase, it says optional, chaplain check or something like that. So if you were playing this game for the first time like I was, you would kind of not even realize that you just missed over your opportunity to do that chaplain check if you wanted to. And the recovery phase also isn't laid out. Like there's different steps for all sub-steps for a lot of these things that I would have liked to see then in one sequence of play overview, because what would happen is then I would have to then reference each of these actual steps in the rule book and then read through them to make sure I'm actually going through all the steps, because there's a lot of steps to everything in this game. None of the steps are really complicated, so that's what's that's why the rule book it's not bad in the sense there's things missing, but it's bad maybe in the sense of its usability. And so there's that. Related to the rulebook is the lack of reference charts. They give you this one. This is the main reference chart that you'll be using in the game, but it doesn't have a sequence of play on it. The sequence of play for this game is only found in the middle of this rulebook, and I was digging through it consistently. And the problem would be that I would have to first of all look at the sequence of play, figure out what step I need to do next, and then I would also then flip to that actual sequence of or step within the rulebook, and I was flipping back and forth and back and forth. Now, one really great idea, which a lot of board games have adopted, and I think for good reason, is putting a sequence of play in the back of the rulebook. But instead, they decided just to leave it blank, had that nice picture of Earl Thorncroft, who is a great character in the game, but put some flavor, put some sort of chart or something that I can use on the back of the rulebook. That would have been nice. Or have the sequence of play on a card, or a nice big sequence of play on a reference sheet like this. Also, I almost wish this was like a kind of a notebook style reference sheet, because I've had to flip this over and over and over and back and forth till my wrist is probably really sore now, because you need to reference both sides, and that kind of got frustrating to have to continually flip this thing back and forth. So the one reference sheet they did have, I felt could have maybe been a little better. So that was frustrating. And related to all of this, and I should just say that for the rule book too, there's just a lot of flavor text in this game when it comes to the rules, and that's something that I knew going into it. Because the game's trying to make itself very thematic, they're trying to make it seem like this is like a training module for like a legitimate, British commander training school, but at the same time be a rule book, and it kind of then creates this interesting situation where there's a lot of just flavor text, and then it probably could be way less than 26 pages at the end of the day, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but because of all the flavor text, it creates a rulebook that's maybe more complicated looking than it really is. Okay, strategy cards in this game are kind of frustrating in terms of their lack of interest. First of all, I should mention all the cards, character, strategy cards, and the tactical cards, don't have any text on them. They just have a number. Which, if you told me that there was a board game that had a bunch of cards, but none of those cards had any text on them, I'd be like, oh, that must be a printing mistake or something. Like, why would you not use that space to actually say what the card does? But that's what this game is. The game's cards all have their text in this briefing booklet. So you'll be referencing this ad nauseum, because every single card in the game has their text in here. And not only that, but the cards don't even at least make an attempt to have any kind of use. Like the strategy cards, all the strategy card really is a modifier to a die roll. That's it. First of all, that's my complaint, is that these strategy cards are simply just a die roll modifier. So the fact there's a deck of cards dedicated to just telling you if you're going to add 1 to 4 to a die roll is a little silly to me. But second of all, they don't even put the die roll modifier on the card. They could have just at least put the number in the, just like they have it. So if you want to reference what, the rule book, if you want to reference this to read what the event was, fine. But at least put the modifier in, so if I didn't really care to actually look it up, I could just follow the modifier on the strategy card. Same goes for the tactical event cards. with no, a lot of times these are just like a simple modifier to a character, or maybe it's an item of some sort. Who knows? But these could have been more detailed. And then same for the character. The character cards, they try to be a little more detailed in terms, okay, well, clearly this card must be for the banker dude and Betty Tanner or someone, I think that's Betty Tanner. Anyway, so it gives you an indication of what the which characters the character event card is for, but that's it. This doesn't tell me any other details, other than I guess it can only be used from turning on, but still, why not tell me, is this a card that is making these characters increasing their attack? I mean, I think the red does imply some sort of incapacitation, but nonetheless, you're going to have to look at that briefing booklet to know exactly what this character event card does. So that's a very kind of a relatively major annoyance, and in addition to that, a lot of these a lot of these tactical cards and character event cards stay in play continuously. Either because when you get the card, you aren't able to actually play it right away, or deploy it, or because it's a card that stays in effect for the rest of the game. Case in point, I drew a card for Sergeant Drake that basically increases attack by 1 for the rest of the game. That's great. But then you're going to collect all these cards that, unfortunately, as I just pointed out, don't tell you what they do, which means throughout the course of the game, you're going to be continuously referencing this booklet to remind yourself, oh, that's what that card does. Oh, how does that card go away again? Yeah, I have to check. What's that card exactly do again? Does it stay in play the whole game? Oh, yeah, it does. Okay. Oh, actually, now I have to remove it because I moved those characters out of the same space. Okay, I forgot about that. Same with the tactical events. What does that tactical event? And a lot of times to activate a tactical event, you need there's a number associated with the tactical event card that's only visible in the booklet. Again, they could have just put this on the tactical event card itself, but no, it's in the booklet. There's a number that you have to roll against to activate that card. So eventually some of these things might get committed to memory. Some might. But for sure, you're not going to remember. Like, I have now 10 cards basically displayed, and I can't remember exactly what the nuances are for each of those. I just remember, generally speaking, oh, that's a card that gives me some sort of air power attack, but I don't remember exactly what it does. And, that's a card that somehow references both Thorncroft and Reynolds being together, but I can't remember exactly what the text was. So that whole aspect of the game was kind of frustrating. And modifiers in general just are not, there's no tracking available for any kind of modifiers. So whether it's from an event card or character event card, tactical event card, these things will be modifying certain elements of the game. And whether it's increasing or decreasing a terrain modifier, or increasing or decreasing a character's attack, like, there's no way that you can track that in the game itself. Like, you just need to basically keep it in your head that there's all these modifiers going on that, you need to keep track of somehow. Okay. Oh, one thing that I found kind of frustrating, minor component issue, is that when you flip over the German unit counters, they clearly say what division they got. Well, not even clearly, it's kind of small, but you can see this unit is from the 20th German division or regiment or whatever. But when you flip it over to its dead side, it's this generic KIA, which is the same for all the German units. So why not just tell me it's the 20th regiment on the backside? Because I tried to keep a stack as I collected KIA units. Minor thing, but something that seemed kind of would have been common sense to do. More variety in terms of how these German units acted. So essentially what makes these German units different is the one number on their front facing side, and that number is just an infiltration modifier, which simply means after they've attacked, if they're adjacent to, they have no one in front of them, no British units in front of them, but they're adjacent to a British unit with a firearm, they roll a die to see if they still advance. And they roll against that number. If it's that number lower, they advance, and if not, then they stay where they are. That's all that number does. Other than that, those 4 units have the same, more or less, rating. Now, it is true that the 7th are stronger overall. Like, the more you have of the 7th, there's this combat table that tells you, depending on the number of those units in the square, how many die they're rolling. So the more units of a regiment, the more die they are rolling. But there's not any real flavor to other than that, and I also felt like that could have been printed on the counters. Like, just tell me how many die does this counter, this German unit roll. How many? To have to reference this chart every single time I'm doing a German combat roll was kind of got tedious. So that was a little disappointing to me. And there's just so many oopsie moments, is what I call them, during the game, where it's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to do that. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that. And it's because a lot of the things you can or can't do are kind of buried in the rules, and really it's not until you reread the rules where you miss things. Like we found finally the Germans brought tanks onto the board. Great. So I was rolling for the tanks, and I just assumed, just like every other unit that's attacking, that after you roll for them, or you have to take into account the squares, defense, the German terrain modifier, and then also you take into account if there's control markers next to the space you're attacking. But specifically for armored units in the rules, I found out later that you don't have to worry about that. And keeping track of, I'm going back to something I said earlier about tracking, keeping track of also the various squares that have already fired on your side, and the squares that have already been activated for the Germans, and then units that have already moved for you. Like, there's just a lot of things going on in this game that you just need to keep track kind of in your head, or make up your own ways of keeping track. And for movement, I figured I need to do something, but for movement, there's 2 types of things you got to keep track of. You have to keep track of the units themselves that have moved, but also the squares that have already been activated for movement, because the rules say you have to go 1 square at a time. Which brings me to another kind of complaint I had, in that keeping, it's like a puzzle game just to move your units around the board, because if you move this unit to this space, you might be overstacked, which now means you need to move units from that space to another space, which in a lot of games isn't a big deal, because you just move your units and just make sure at the end that nothing is overstacked. But in this game, you have to roll to see if you're allowed to move the units in the first place, and also to see how far they're going to move. So you actually have to contemplate and think out, okay, well, if I want to move this unit to that space, I need to first see if I can move that unit to this space. So now I have to roll for that unit. But if that unit fails its roll, then I'm not going to be able to move. And it becomes a pretty kind of chaotic puzzle as you actually are trying to plan out strategic movements, because of this factor of not knowing if you're actually going to be able to roll to move those units, how far you want to move them. So that was kind of a challenge, and seemed a little unnecessary. And I also just felt there was more opportunity for flavor during the combat itself in terms of the weapons that were being used. There's a decent variety of weapons, but for the most part, it's just a number of die you're rolling, and then in some cases, the weapon also allows you to hit on a 5 or a 6, denoted by that black triangle symbol, opposed to just a 6. And then also, I thought it was odd that you might have a British unit, a British character, let's say Thorncroft, with a gun, and he's rolling 5 dice, and then meanwhile 5 German infantry units are also only collectively rolling 5 dice against him, even though those Germans are theoretically probably much more equipped in terms of weaponry and probably skill to a degree. Like, maybe Thorncroft is really good at shooting, or Reynolds is good at shooting, but I mean, these are still soldiers. So that just seemed a little wonky to me, that the Germans were basic, a single German unit was almost as good as your worst citizen in the game, which just seemed a little funny to me. But from a balancing standpoint, I kind of understand why they had to do that, but I'm wondering if there was ways they could have mitigated that. And then, maybe the dice in the game are all 6-sided dice, but maybe if they had dice with symbols that maybe had effects, and based on what maybe certain weapons had certain effects that could potentially be triggered if you rolled a certain symbol on the dice instead of just you're hitting a unit or not hitting a unit. I think that was my biggest disappointment, is a lot of times you're rolling a lot of dice and you might not get a single hit, and then it was like that whole attack was worthless. And I appreciate the games that try to mitigate that by at least letting you maybe suppress the enemy if you miss your die roll, but maybe you miss it in a certain way. Like and in this game it's all or nothing a lot of the times, it seemed. And a couple things that are more maybe on the neutral side that I want to quick mention is, as much as this again seems like a war game, it's not. There's a lot of elements of war games that are not simulated. First of all, there's no range really. You're just attacking. You can only attack things adjacent to you. All weapons have the same then range, like regardless. Also, there's no I guess that's the main. Oh, line of sight. There's no line of sight because you're just attacking things adjacent to you. Nothing matters line of sight, which then makes combat very simplified and easy to do. But okay, so that was a lot right there, and I know it sounds like there's a lot of negative things about this game, but there are a lot of positives too. And the main thing about this game is it is very thematic. It's almost like you're playing you're watching a movie unfold before your eyes because of all the things that are going on throughout this village of Berkham-Stokes. For example, I drew this fortify counter early in the game. I put it on the bridge. I'm just picturing myself. I've been picturing the scene of like this bridge being fortified by the villagers, along with like the couple characters I had guarding it. I drew this card called Baker Sugar, which turned the church now kind of into a communication hub, because originally, I guess, historically speaking, for the town of Berkham-Stokes, the shop was kind of the communication hub that had some sort of communication channel with the actual British Army. But by drawing this a tactical event card, it allowed then the church to be then the new communication hub, which was really better because a lot of the tactical cards require you to have this shop under your control, but this Baker Sugar tactical card made it so that the shop was always under control regardless of if there was a German control marker there, essentially meaning that because the description in the briefing booklet was saying now the church is your communication hub. And I just thought that seemed kind of thematic, imagining them setting up this whole entire radio station within the church of Berkham-Stokes. One of my favorite parts of the game was having what I'm calling the interrogation scene, where Sergeant Drake, who is the only character that can initiate a chaplain check, gathered all of these village characters in the southeast square space, along with the banker Pendrake, because Pendrake has an ability of increasing the stacking limit of a space by 2, because he's like the banker, good with organization. So I'm just picturing Pendrake like organizing all these characters around, and Sergeant Drake's one by one talking to all of them. And it turned out that Drayden Fox, the village journalist, was the chaplain, and immediately Sergeant Drake shot Fox on the spot, and so I just thought that was kind of funny to play out. And then there was like the defense of the farmers at the bridle path space. So I was kind of doing a tactical retreat, moving back the characters that actually could carry good weapons, and I had a soldier unit that had already taken a hit and I didn't want them to die right away. And so I just left the farmers without even a weapon out in the field, because just by having a British unit in a space, it prevents the Germans from advancing. Like they can't just blow by a British unit. So there's value of just having basically a human meat shield. And so the village farmers were just out in the space, no weapons, just standing there, and actually survived like an attack of 5 dice. So they gave me basically, their sacrifice gave me a whole round to move and try to, readjust my strategy, which was funny to me. And So that, I mean, there were tons of moments like that in this game, which kind of stand out, and were just an enjoyment. I mean, I laughed out loud, I think, a few times, just kind of imagining this scene unfolding, and if it was like a movie. So that's what kind of makes you enjoy this game, are those moments. And combat resolution itself is quick and nice. I for the most part, I do appreciate how quick it is to quickly figure out how many dice you're rolling, what the modifiers are, and that goes by relatively fast. So I do appreciate that aspect of the game. There's this, in terms of the setup of this game, there is actually, that's the one thing that I guess is relatively nice, is this setup chart. This is the one illustration pretty much for the whole game. But it does tell you exactly where everything goes. And the counters that actually go on the board say where they go, which is awesome. And then the counters that aren't supposed to go on the board say that. And then you have some exceptions where they say, you just put them off board. So I appreciate that part of the game. The AI. So with any solitaire game, a big concern is going to be, how does artificial intelligence play? Is there a lot of situations, or are there a lot of situations where you're making decisions for the AI? But in this game, how it's designed is that you're really not. Everything is very clear cut on what the AI is supposed to do, how they get on the board, who there is a priority chart on who they're supposed to attack. So I really enjoyed that part of the gameplay, and not having to worry about, okay, well, in this situation, what is the AI player supposed to do? I don't know. The rules aren't very clear, so now I have to basically roll a die and see what happens. In almost all senses, this game doesn't force you to do that ever. So I enjoyed that part of the game. Now, at the end of the day, is this a game that I would want to play again? And the biggest concern, as I mentioned earlier, is the time commitment. To play any game for 7 hours is a lot. And again, I'm really hoping that, because it was mainly just because I had to reference this rulebook so many times just to get that sequence of play down, that really extended my gameplay out. So I would not necessarily want to play this game again if it really would be taking me 7 hours. But the reason why I would want to play this game again is there's so many so let me just show you. This is the number of character cards I did not even draw this first game. And then this is the number of, just to kind of give you a visual, of tactical cards I never drew. And all of these cards have a wide variety of, changes to the gameplay. Also, I drew, for example, a card that would have let me place a British tank onto the board. And unfortunately, I didn't get to activate it, but I did. I at least drew the card that could have let me activate it, and that would have been fun to play with. So there's a lot in this game that you don't experience during one gameplay, because they do have a lot of cards that you're not going to go through in a single game. So that does kind of pique my interest in wanting to play it again. And in addition to that, this game is, although I would not say this is a traditional war game, it is very strategic. There are moments where you're thinking like you are a commander. Like, okay, I need to leave these guys here. They're just going to have to block this square for as long as possible. Maybe, they're going to have to do a heroic sacrifice for me. But at the end of the day, that's the strategic decisions you're going to have to make, because if you just move everyone together, then you're guaranteed the Germans are just going to take that square the next space. So you kind of you're forced to leave someone back. And then managing your weapons, that's such a big part of this game. Is you don't start fully equipped. Like, you have these home guard units that are just standing around with no weapon, and throughout the game you're trying to get them weapons, because they at least have a +1 modifier to a die roll for ranged combat, but they don't get to do ranged combat if they don't have a weapon. So you're always trying to manage how to get your units weapons, and then there's the healing part of the game. with Dr. Greystone trying to move around wounded soldiers to Dr. Greystone in the hopes you might be able to get them healed. But meanwhile, you have these character events coming in every round that kind of can pretty dramatically change your strategy because, sometimes the bonuses that these cards provide are only active if you have your characters in certain locations of the board, and that forces you to choose, okay, well, if I want this character bonus, I'm going to have to move this character now over there. So if I did that, how else can I then achieve what I was trying to achieve? And what this game really does well at is give you that feeling of suffocation as the Germans are closing in around you. And this goes back to what I was saying, how this game kind of, in some ways, feels like a pandemic in that as the Germans start circling around the church, every square they take is permanently taken. There's a German control marker that gets placed on the square. Once they move in, you can never take it back. So as the game goes on, turn by turn, you're watching as more and more of your squares become controlled by the Germans. And there's so many negatives to that. Not only is it a losing condition if all squares become German controlled, but there's a penalty associated with defending against German attacks if a square adjacent to you is controlled. So you want to avoid it from that perspective. A lot of cards require you to have control of spaces in order to activate a square. So if I, for example, wanted that tank to come out on the board for me, it says I first need to make sure I have control of the bridge. So there's a lot of incentive to not give up a square inch of ground. But of course, over time, you're going to have to. You're going to start taking wounds, and you're going to have to start consolidating and bringing your forces together, and you have no choice but to start giving up that ground. And there's this tug of war, like how long do you hold on to these locations before you start pulling back? And the game does a great job of that. Like that's where it really does actually feel like a war game, more than any other war game, in that you really feel the pressure of the enemy kind of surrounding your church. And that was a fun thing to experience, and I really enjoyed it. At the very end of the game, I had essentially my final last few troops in the church hunkered down with a Vickers machine gun. Sadly, I had this event that caused both Thorncroft and Barnstable to become incapacitated. They were like fighting with each other. So as the Germans are surrounding my church, these two guys are in a quarrel. Are completely useless, unfortunately. Thorncroft has a modifier of 3 for ranged combat, so that character event really pissed me off. But nonetheless, that's just how this game plays. So it's kind of a treat in a way to play this game, because it's definitely not like anything else I've ever played and maybe ever will play again in the near future. So yeah, I definitely have interest in trying in this game again. It would be nice if it was kind of designed also for co-op play. You could, in theory, play this game and assign each character to each player, split up the characters to different players. But I think it wouldn't, you may as well done just be playing the game together, which you could do. You could just play this game with a group of people and make decisions on how to do things collectively, because so many moments in this game you kind of want to enjoy with someone else. Like the farmer scene. I thought it was funny. Like I have this group of farmers just standing out in the field trying to prevent this British regiment from taking the ground, and it would have been more fun to enjoy that moment with someone else. So that was kind of one maybe disappointment to it with the game, but something I wanted to point out. And one other thing I have to point out is this game is extremely, extremely, extremely dice heavy. You are rolling dice constantly, and they can be very, very unforgiving. There's a lot of times where I needed a 6 and I wouldn't get it, or I absolutely didn't want a 6 and I got the 6. Like I was gonna try to place this mine in a square. This, what's it called? Fugas mine. Fugas mine. Anyway, I wanted to place this mine down in a square. It would have really, really helped me out. But if you roll 6, you blow it up prematurely and injure the people trying to place it. And of course, that's what happened to me. Like, this could have been game changing. and it went again. It didn't go in my favor. And like healing a character you only can heal a character on a 6, and you only get to do a heal check once a round. So, and a round, like I said, about a 30-minute period of time. So it's like you don't get that 6, and it's kind of like, you gotta wait a whole another round to maybe try to heal that person. And so yeah, the dice rolling can be unforgiving. Can be unforgiving for the Germans too. Sometimes they're rolling like 6 or 7 die, and they don't get a single hit because they're only hitting on a 6. So it goes both ways, but that's something that I want to point out too, because I know a lot of people probably really hate games that will rely heavily on how the dice roll, and this game is no exception to that. So, with all that said, that is Codeword Cromwell. Like I said, a very unique game. It is out of print, tough to find, but if this game, I encourage you, if you're looking for a unique thematic World War II solitaire experience, this game definitely might appeal to you, because, like I said, it's pretty unique at the end of the day. It does a lot of things that I haven't seen other games do, and maybe some things that other games don't do for good reason, but nonetheless, it is unique. So, thanks so much, guys, for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions about the gameplay in the comments section. I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, appreciate your time. Please like and subscribe, and hope to see you guys again soon.